Hello, welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. Happy African History Month. Today is February 11th, and for those of you that know, today is the 30th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's release from prison after 27 years. So in this day in 1990, February 11th, it was actually Sunday, February 11th, 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. He had spent 27 years there. He later became the first black president of South Africa. Like, wow. So from prison to president, and even before then, the journey he had to go through to get there is incredible, amazing. South Africa was under something called apartheid, which I guess there's a parallel between Jim Crow, but it was just incredibly horrible. Just a very vicious application of not just racial segregation, but racial oppression that was enacted upon the black majority, because this was South Africa, so the majority of the people were black from the white minority. In addition to physically separating where blacks, whites, and others could live, there was also the jobs that people could get, the level of participation in politics that they could have, and so there was, and of course, economics. The economic controls and restrictions placed on people were severe, and violence. The state-sponsored violence that was carried out against black people who didn't cooperate, even black people who did cooperate, were victims of state violence. But the state violence was particularly harsh on those who didn't cooperate. But Nelson Mandela, who, by the way, his birth name was not Nelson Mandela. And I'm going to try to pronounce it Rolihlahla. But his name was changed in school to sound more Christian. It's it's interesting, and when you see the parallels of what blacks in the United States were going through, blacks in South Africa, blacks in other countries were also going through, seeing these parallels and seeing that, like, South Africa actually was like one of the last places to get rid of its official discrimination. And not surprisingly, United States of America, was one of its last supporters, until eventually, due to the wave of public outcry, America had to turn its back on South Africa and its policies as well. But Nelson Mandela was born. He was actually the son of a chieftain, and he wound up leaving, abandoning his birthright to become the next chief, so that he could study law and become a lawyer. So he became a lawyer and was representing black people in South Africa. And he was also a part of the ANC, the African National Congress, which was opposed to the National Party and apartheid and the various brutalities and inequities that were taking place as a result of apartheid. One of the other things I don't think I specifically mentioned was that 80% of the land was apportioned for white residents, white people in South Africa. This was part of the plan and design to make sure that the white minority maintained economic, political, and military power over the black majority. Originally, Nelson was opposed to violence, and he felt the ANC should not engage in violent acts. But there were different opinions on this, and it wasn't, I believe, until there was one particular gruesome massacre by the state, by police, of black protesters, that Nelson changed his mind and realized that it would take violence to stop them. So he actually joined the military wing of the ANC, and this was what he was eventually arrested for and sent to prison for 27 years. The thing that I really, there's so many things about Nelson, and it's to just try to encapsulate it to just a few minutes is really tough. But I think it's important to realize that even though he got out, those 27 years have to have a toll. I mean, as a human being locked up for 27 years, it's a lot of pressure. When he came out, if you take a look at the individual he was before he went in and the individual he was when he came out, it's telling that those years really had a toll on him, and his wish at that point was for reconciliation. The problem with reconciliation is, did it actually, who benefited from reconciliation? So you can say on one hand, well, maybe black people won't be victims of state violence anymore, but could they actually change their situation and gain economic and political power? And when he was elected president, some political power was there. But a lot of the other effects continued. And that is why, despite his arc, despite his evolution, he is often viewed as a parallel to Martin Luther King Jr. as opposed to a Malcolm X, because you got to see him get to that point, go from from peaceful, a nonviolent a philosophy of nonviolent resistance, to believing that violence is acceptable in certain situations, and then back to willing to just say, hey, let's just let the bygones be bygones, and just try to end any hostilities, whether or not it actually was beneficial for the black population. But that's interesting, because many of the leaders in the United States just never had the opportunity to die of old age, as Mandela eventually did after ascending to the presidency, and leading in an era of reconciliation between the black and white population in South Africa. But I think it's important to realize that even our heroes can be, if we're human beings, even our heroes can be worn down by the circumstances, by the pressures. And if we're going to keep a goal in mind, that should be something that stays in our mind, as opposed to just keeping an individual in our mind that will follow no matter what. And it's not to diminish him, it's to recognize how much he went through. I don't say these things, but it's interesting seeing the parallel and the contrast between Nelson and Winnie, who was his second wife, and that the fire she maintained throughout, and even why they wound up getting divorced, as opposed to just the toll that his 27 years of prison took on him. I think it's really important to honestly evaluate whether or not, certain philosophies are actually in the best interest, not just short term, but long term, of the people you're fighting for. If you're fighting against an injustice, is taking the position of, okay, let's just do what the people perpetrating this injustice want, so we can stop any bloodshed. Because the question is, does bloodshed actually end, or does it just continue in a more in a civilized fashion? Because there's still suffering, there's still oppression, there's still injustice happening, and the same people are in power, but now they've been legitimized by people's decision to ignore their crimes. So I think it's something to take a serious look at, to appreciate all that he accomplished, because he did accomplish a lot. For him to fight for so long, to get to this age where he was still an incredibly influential figure, and to try to usher into a situation where he was now the president of the country, and to get to a point where he could do good on behalf of his people. That is something definitely to look at, and to celebrate, and to celebrate the fact that he got out after 27 years, that he fought, and this is the anniversary of his release from prison. So I want to celebrate Nelson Mandela, celebrate his release, celebrate all his contributions, but learn from them. Learn from the things he's done right, and learn from the things that he could have done better. So thank you for checking out this episode. Once again, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And we have much more planned for the African History Month, as well as, just regular content that I'll be putting out on the channel. So I'll see you next episode. Thank you for checking us out.